Defensible Typology.
Welcome back to part 2, possibly. Meta framework is a specific framework. It still must have definitions or criteria. And a review of the status quo falls under observations, okay? And belongs in framework. So let's look at Personality Town. What do we got? What do we got? We got your psychoanalytics down there with Sigmund Freud. We got your psychodynamics there with Carl Jung. We got your humanistic with your Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. We got your trait psychology and your Jordan Peterson. We got your social cognitive with I don't know whose name it is. And then we've got the mysteries of the ancient world. And in the center of it all, we have defensible typology. And the reason it's in the center of it all is because defensible typology, which is to say Jung's cognitive functions, rendered correctly as a way of modeling human being through time, subsumes all of these. What I mean by subsumes is it explains psychoanalytic. It explains to Freud why he's talking about that. It explains why that's a possible way to interpret things and why certain types will be more drawn to that interpretation than others. Same with psychodynamic, same with humanistic, same with traits, same with ancient, same with social cognitive. Defensible typology explains everything that each of those attempts to explain, but also explains why they're attempting to explain it. So it subsumes everything. Terms 17 through 19. Granted, I did not really prove that right there or establish it. I just sort of threw out the claim. But we'll get there, okay? It does subsume everything. But I granted I didn't back that claim up well enough there. Terms 17 through 19, these are the last three terms. Terms are tiring. Framings. A frame includes definitions, observations, criteria. Just hammering that home, okay? If it's a definition, an observation, or criteria, it doesn't belong anywhere other than in the framework. Okay. Taxonomy is an archetypal arrangement of members of a diverse set into subsets, especially naturally occurring, intuitively correct subsets.
What's a turtle?
Well, it's like there's 7 buildings, remember? There's 7 buildings visible. What? I mean, how else do you want me to prove it? Except you look at it like I just looked at it and we both count them. And you go, yep, there sure are. And if you want to object to the fact that there's stuff, but we might not be able to see it says visible. So even if, no matter what you want to say, if you get a judge of any dispassion whatsoever, any random person off the street, frankly, and you say to them, is it intuitively so, observationally correct, that there are 7 buildings visible in this image? They're going to say, yeah. Do I need to prove it beyond showing you this image that there are 7? Is there any additional proof I could provide? Not really. I guess I could find the person who drew that picture and ask them if they remember secretly putting in some invisible buildings. But even if they did, that's why it says visible. Okay. Model. A model explains and demonstrates how the mechanics of a dynamic system operates. For example, early astronomers would make a model where if they push here a little bit, then the various planets and everything would go around in their relative speeds and distances and stuff, and keep time with the heavens, so to speak. That would be modeling successfully the solar system. What we're doing here with typology, though, is actually an explanation, which is way better than a model. Okay, an explanation, even though it somehow does less than a model. I mean, cognitive functions models as well, but or can be used to generate an actual model. Okay, but an explanation is so much more powerful because an explanation provides the mechanism by which a phenomenon occurs. A good explanation provides the means of verifying the articulated mechanism and the means of falsifying the presented explanation accordingly. For example, if I explain that cars move around because there are coordinated teams of miniature horses underneath the hood, I've actually given a great explanation because anyone can just open the hood and verify or falsify the claim instantly. And remember, what makes a good explanation is the capacity of the explanation to be verified or falsified independently by third parties. So, main personality theories recap: Sigmund Freud. Psychoanalytic, it's an explanation of disorders. It's a framework for treatment. It's managing, it says human beings are all about managing primitive versus civilized impulses. I think I misspelled managing there. Why primitive versus civilized impulses? Like, there's no good reason to draw a line and say this particular impulse is more or less civilized. If I want to have a sword duel to the death over your besmirching my honor, is that somehow more civilized than if I just could run up and smash you in the head with a rock? Where are we gonna go with this civilized thing? I guess probably Freud would say both those impulses to fight are equally primitive, but I think that that's incorrect. I mean, one can certainly make a civilized, informed, fully enlightened choice to engage in use of force, and it doesn't require your body any longer to bear the brunt of executing that use of force. You could be a drone strike operator or something, So I think that's kind of insane. But regardless, what it's not is an explanation of personality, okay? It's an explanation of disorders. What's wrong with him? Oh, he didn't get enough of his mommy's teeth when he was little, and so he's got penis envy. Some shit like that, right? It's not an explanation of personality, though. Psychodynamic. This is, the way that it's understood now is basically excludes Jungian cognitive functions from it. Even though they credit Jung as part of this psychodynamic movement, it's functionally a behaviorist framework for explaining deviation. And it says that it takes some of Freud's stuff, it switches it from primitive and civilized to conscious and unconscious. Now we're normatively neutral, right? We're conscious and unconscious, but still doesn't define it, either of those terms, and no explanation for why certain things are unconscious inherently, other than Jung's archetype presentation of cognitive functions, which didn't get much further away from metaphor than everything else they were working with. So it's basically a behaviorist framework for explaining why people do things, except the triggers are not understood by the person who's being triggered. So again, you're talking about an explanation of disorders, ultimately. Humanistic ones. This attempts to jettison personality entirely as an issue and says parents and circumstances impede or promote actualization. Personality is about being liberated in order that you may attain the highest level of actual self. And if there's something wrong with you, you should probably blame your parents for not loving you enough. And one way of thinking about that is as looking at Maslow's pyramid of needs, hierarchy of needs. So he's saying, okay, here's my theory of personality. If you get your basic needs met, like hunger and thirst, then you're able to pay attention to whether the world's safe and stable and secure. And if it is, then you get to pay attention to whether you're getting enough love and who you love. And if that's taken care of, then you get to pay attention to self-esteem, achievement, competence, and you need recognition and respect from others. And if you get that, well, then you need to live up to your fullest and your unique potential. This is a basic human need. But you have to go in order. Okay, well, fine. Even if that's totally true, that does not explain why Bob and Joe, despite being raised by the same parents, being identical twins, have such dramatically different personalities, does it? They both have all of their various needs met. And even if you can explain the difference, you can say, like, well, the problem here is Joe's not popular, but Bob's really popular. So Joe doesn't have his love and belonging need met yet. That's why he's messed up. Well, maybe he's not as much of an attention whore as his brother or something, you know? Maybe he's satisfied with a couple of relationships that are really close. Maybe he is loved and loves and accepted and doesn't feel alienated and doesn't feel lonely, but is nevertheless much more isolated socially than his brother because, let's say, one's an introvert, one's an extrovert. Introverts can feel adequately loved too, even though they're not constantly out there glad-handing. So you've got a problem here when you're explaining differences between people purely in terms of this. You fail utterly, right? It's not the case that everybody who's reached the self-actualization level acts exactly the same. You know, and it's also not the case that everyone's potential is unique, right? So, for me, self-actualization is going to be expressed in this kind of shit that I'm doing right now, I guess. But the thing is, that's true for any ENTP. But let's not jump ahead. So let's recap now trait personality. People score high or low on a set list of core attributes. The tests measure against other test takers. It's like the pari-mutuel betting of personality tests. It's descriptive only, doesn't even attempt to be explanatory, and purposely truncates each of its attributes that it purportedly measures such that it has no other side to it. Like, scoring high on extroversion doesn't mean you score low on introversion. Why not? Who knows? Okay, social cognitive is just woke bullshit, basically. It's like they take the humanistic thing and then they just throw in some identity politics. Okay, I'm sure somebody out there could be like, Eric, that is so reductive. You obviously didn't research social cognitive. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever, fine. I get the gist of it. This is dumb. It's like, yes, people are impacted by their society and by their cultural norms and stuff like that. And sure, when cultural norms are antithetical to your nature, then you're going to internalize some of those negative perspectives and maybe have self-esteem issues, hate yourself, doubt yourself, whatever. All of those things are true. But that doesn't explain personality, right? It just doesn't explain personality. You might blame society for being personality-centric towards some and personality-averse towards others, but it doesn't actually explain personality at all. And this is what you get if you Google what are the main personality theories or something. I was like, there's some places say there are 5, some say 6, some say 7. So what about the ancient ones? Well, this is how they used to do it. They had this x-axis, y-axis thing going on. At least this has poles, right? On the x-axis, you've got changeability of temperament versus unchangeability of temperament. Some people are much more steady in their affect, at least their displays, than other people. Other people are much more moody or display a lot more volatility in their emotions, right? Now, whether or not that display actually links to volatility is another question. There are some types that may have emotional volatility that they don't display very actively because they're not extroverting their affect so much. And then on the y-axis here, you got strong emotions and weak emotions. And you can see how they've broken it into these 4 categories: melancholic, choleric, sanguine, and phlegmatic. And guess what? If you get one of those, then you get a list of adjectives. Here you go. Good news. You're playful, easygoing, sociable, carefree, hopeful, and contented. Oh gosh, I am so sorry. But you are anxious, worried, unhappy, suspicious, serious, and thoughtful. Well, at least I'm serious and thoughtful. Yeah, but you're seriously thoughtful about stupid shit, so... Like, who wants to be melancholic, right? This is so normative. Like, phlegmatic, reasonable, principled, controlled, persistent, steadfast, and calm. Versus choleric. Excitable, egocentric, exhibitionist, impulsive, histrionic, active. What, I don't want to take off all my clothes and throw a tantrum if I'm choleric, but that's what it would seem to imply, doesn't it? So these are the temperaments. At least they have poles, but they still don't have anything you can actually measure, right? How do you measure those things? Sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic with a modern twist includes a neurotransmitter, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid, and phlegmatic goes with glutamate and serotonin. And then the traits are social attachment, behavioral activation, behavioral inhibition, and partial reinforcement. How do you measure those? In what units are you measuring those things? And why don't we include self-pleasuring as one of those things? Self-attendance. Like taking baths, eating, stuff like that. Is that a behavior thing? Is that behavior activation? No. Is it partial reinforcement? Maybe. The point is, these things aren't measurable. They're just descriptions of things that we can observationally agree about, like there are 7 buildings, but that we can't actually measure, unlike the 7 buildings. Here's another way of looking at this ancient stuff. Are you hot, dry, wet, or cold? In other words, are you yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, or blood? In other words, are you fire, earth, water, or air? Well, it's a comfortable 72 degrees with low humidity is my answer to that, so that's, I guess, how I feel right at the moment. Now, here's a new ancient kind of thing. It's role personality. This is partially socionics, it's partially Enneagram, it's partially C.S. Joseph, it's a bunch of different things. You're not a person whose cognitive function stack is introverted intuition followed by extroverted feeling. You're the mystical, unique, dark wonder. You're not somebody who's kind of flaky. You're the enthusiast. You're not Eric. You're the curve surfer. Okay, so these things, these archetypes are walking in the wrong direction. We need to excise this nonsense from our understanding of stuff. It is true that Enneagram is a nice descriptive taxonomy of one part of FI. Maybe most of FI, I'm not sure. But the point is, this is totally subsumed by cognitive functions. And at best, what it does is help us to better talk about our own tendencies when we face the threat of certain negative emotions. But it doesn't provide any mechanics. And again, nothing that can be measured. So now let's look at something that can be measured, traits. Trait personality measures your adjectives. What? The Big Five calls these parts attributes, the parts of people, and measures personality in units of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeability, and neuroticism. Well, guess what? Cognitive functions, typology has adjectives too. Here's some adjectives: concise, wordy, creative, unoriginal, effective, unimpactful, graceful, awkward, solvent, inefficient, passionate, ambivalent, disinterested, biased, reliable, flaky. So, I get that they've got reliable, flaky there covered with conscientiousness, but what does disinterested, biased get covered by in the Big Five? Because it is true that some people take a disinterested approach towards problems, trying to solve them based on what's most universally true, and some take a interested approach towards problems, trying to solve them in terms of what's most in their interests. Which one of those things is covered by those Big Five traits? Well, none of them are, right? And there's not any particularly great reason why we should choose those 5, except in doing a bunch of tests, those are the ones that seem to if you describe people with those terms, you're most effectively able to compare people against each other and learn something about them beyond just a number on a test. Okay, so in this instance, though, we've got 16 words here. And the reason there's 16 words is because it's 8 words for each of the cognitive functions, plus the opposite end of the pole. And that's what Big Five doesn't acknowledge, is that if you are high on openness, then you must be low on closedness. It just doesn't want to go there, because then all of a sudden you're starting to deal with things that aren't attributes anymore, right? So if you're measuring my height and you say I'm 6'4", you don't have to say I'm low on shortness and high on tallness. You just have to say I'm 6'4". The problem is they don't have numbers like that for adjectives. So psychology currently fails to answer any of these kind of questions adequately. Why is that person so meh compared to most? Why are those two people so similar? Why does Joe constantly act like Joe, even when it's not a good idea to? How can I get Bob to be more meh? What's wrong with Betty? How could those two brothers be raised by the same family and be so different? Well, typology's first advantage then over other personality models is that it knows what it measures. It measures attention, and it has units in which to measure attention, namely units of time. So you can measure attention in terms of minutes per hour, hours per day, something like that, or in you can observe instances of it occurring, attention, and you can observe for how long it persists. In this case, what I'm doing here is, by our eventual definitions, would qualify as extroverted intuition. To the extent that I'm reading out loud stuff that I've written before, it's extroverted sensing following through on a plan to present my extroverted intuition that I had already done for your consumption for extroverted feeling reasons. Now, this is jumping way ahead, and we don't want to get into any of that, but the point is, typology's first advantage, and huge advantage, and the number one thing to note when you're thinking about any kind of personality theory is, what does it measure, and what are the units? Typology tells us we're measuring attention in time. So just a reminder, this meta framework class has been designed to look outside the town and include impacts that would otherwise be non-topical. Namely, how does typology compare against these other personality theories that could pop up if you Google what are the main personality theories. And that brings us back to the map to remind us where we are. We're in the theory, the purple circle over there in the top left rectangle. And if you look below, that's that circle zoomed in on. And you see that it's got those 5 things in it. And then framings over here in this bigger circle, that's zoomed in on the framing circle, which isn't shown, but would be around that framings there. And you see it's got 1 white check mark next to meta framework. There will be another white check mark next to meta framework before we're done with it. So this is the first of 2 meta framework classes, but this class here was probably broken into 2 classes. So the next class will be the second half of the meta framework class, and then we'll get into the learning framework, case framework, and then we get into stuff that's actually a lot more interesting. But this is a necessary pre-work we got to do. But after we finish the frameworks, then we'll get into what attention is, different kinds of attention, and stuff, the actual meat of cognitive functions. Okay, so thanks a lot for watching this video. Please become a member of my channel, and you'll get more videos like this as I'm continuing to, I've got it all mapped out and everything. I'm making these videos now, so I'm going to finish this class. I've done this before for a job, it's like, so it's not that difficult for me to make curriculum, and it'll be worth it if you're a member. You'll get plenty of videos that I put a lot of time into treating as though I was a teacher, you'll get all of those and all the materials, and non-members won't get those. So hopefully you'll become a member. I'm trying to make some money because we're always broke.
Defensible Typology.